Hello, and welcome to today's workshop, Readers, Advisory, Ideas, and Practice, presented by Booklist. My name is Susan McGuire, and I am the Senior Editor for Collection Management and Library Outreach here at Booklist. We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Penguin Random House Library Marketing, for their generous support of this program. We'll send out some additional resources and recommendations from our sponsor in tomorrow's follow-up materials, and we'll showcase some of those resources throughout the program. Before we begin with today's program, I'd like to go over some technical details. Links to all of today's slide presentations were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. We will send PDFs of all of these slides, along with additional materials from our sponsor, to everyone tomorrow. If you have any trouble locating these materials, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable them on your screen, please look for and click the Show Captions icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of them at any time by selecting Caption Settings. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we encourage everyone to submit your questions in the Q&A box. Our panelists will be grabbing questions from this box throughout the presentation, and we will be sure to pass along all unanswered questions to our panelists after the webinar so they can follow up via email. The chat box will also remain open throughout the entire program, and we will send the chat messages along with our follow-up materials to everyone tomorrow. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates this standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. We have an entire afternoon of workshops planned today. Hooray! All designed to keep you up to speed with both the ideas and practice that will enhance your RA game. You can see today's schedule on the screen. Please note that you are welcome to attend any and all of these sessions and will receive a recording of every session tomorrow. So let's get started with our first workshop, The State of Genre Blending in Adult and YA, presented by Misha Stone and Alex Brown. Alex Brown is a queer Black librarian, local historian, writer, and author. They are an Ignyte Award-winning and Hugo Award-nominated writer and critic who covers speculative fiction and young adult literature for Reactor Magazine, Locus Magazine, NPR Books, Reader's Digest, and elsewhere. They also write on topics such as queerness, Black history, librarianship, and pop culture. Misha Stone, she, her, is the Reader's Advisory librarian in Seattle. She teaches Reader's Advisory as an adjunct instructor at the University of Washington's Information School. She was a 2022 World Fantasy Award judge and a former Clarion West Writers Workshop board member. She has a regular column in the Seattle Times and enthuses about books on local television when asked. Take it away, Alex and Misha.
Hello. Give me a sec. Zoom keeps popping up random AI stuff that I can't turn off. Okay, let me share my screen. Share.
The perils of Zoom.
Ugh. And present. Okay, there we go.
All right.
Hello. And
Well,
Misha, go ahead.
we'll both be jumping in at the beginning, and I just want to say thank you all for being here. And as Becky Spratford just noted in the comments, you're all here from all over. So thank you so much for taking time to be here with us. I'm just going to say a little bit about myself. I'm a Reader's Advisory librarian in Seattle. So one of my favorite claims to fame being on local television is when I talked about a T. Kingfisher book. She saw it, someone posted it, and she said, "A truly epic librarian just put my fantasy romance with severed heads into the hand of a morning show host, and I cannot stop giggling uncontrollably." So I will forever be proud of that particular moment. I teach Reader's Advisory courses at the University of Washington in an adjunct capacity. Just overall, I really love doing this work and always feel like it's a generative and never-ending learning space to be in. And I'm going to hand it to Alex.
So a little bit about me. My area of focus is mostly speculative fiction. I've been a book critic on speculative fiction and YA since like 2011 or so, doing it for a while. I'm also a historian and an archivist, as well as a high school librarian. So I write about Black history and California history, words all over the place. in particular relating to RA, I do a couple of columns on Reactor magazine that I think would be useful. Every 2 months, I do most anticipated YA speculative fiction. So highlighting 20 to 30 or so upcoming titles that I think are interesting and relevant, usually broken out by sort of genres or topics. And then I have a backlist column. I like this column, except I get annoyed because I misspelled bonanza. I've never gotten around to changing it. But anyways, I try to do a collection of YA and adult speculative titles that look at topics or genre ideas or weird themes that often pop up that I don't necessarily see get represented online, or like if people are looking for weird girly books, it's the same 5 cishet white adult literary fiction books. So like trying to like be a little more diverse. This month I don't usually do genre months, but I did Women's History Month specifically so I could do a list of 5 trans women. So like that kind of stuff. So it should be useful.
Yeah, and so when I was asked to talk about genre blends and I was asked to do YA, I was like, no way, I can't do that. I need to bring in someone who I know knows their stuff. And I've been just watching Alex's amazing work for years. Saw them on a panel of Black librarians at the FIACon many years ago. In any case, just so appreciate you, Alex, and all the work you're doing out there to celebrate and center representative works, and also all the work you do on promoting short fiction. That's often where a lot of new authors are coming forward. And so definitely check out those Reactor Mag and other articles that Alex does. So just starting here, thinking about genre blends, Megan McArdle did a reader's advisory, book for ALA. And, it's about not breaking a genre, ignoring what makes it great, she says, but writers who blend must have a solid knowledge of and respect for the genre before they can use it. In other words, one has to know where the borders are to deliberately cross them. And we wanted to kind of dive into basically talk about how this is not new, right? Genre blends have existed for a very long time. It's just that there's different trends that sort of bring them forward. And I think next slide. Thank you, Alex. So yeah, the terms might change, but essentially if you wouldn't mind going one back, sorry. So the popularity will sort of rise and fall over time. It waxes and wanes. But readers don't always see that long buildup. They don't always know that there's things that preceded the big thing that they're seeing right now. And this is where also backlist authors come in. There's a lot of different connections we can make. But marketing matters. Genre is popular, but there's always been bias. I'm going to get into that a little bit towards it. And then adaptations also really will drive interest, trends, and what we see in terms of those combinations that start to be really popular and attention-grabby. Alex, you're going to touch on some of what you're seeing in YA.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm having weird tech stuff. I apologize. This should not be good. Anyways, yes. So there's a big, if you're looking at trends in YA and adult, there's a lot of overlap, but there's also some crossover, or excuse me, there's also some pretty big distinctions, particularly when it comes to genres like speculative fiction. In YA anyways, there's just really not that much in the way of speculative fiction genre variety right now. So I keep a list, and I'll show you where that list is on my website, but I keep a list of all of the speculative YA that gets published every year, traditionally published. And if you know anything about the genre, right now you know that we are in a sort of both expansion and contraction in terms of genre. Almost all of the YA genre right now is romantasy, fantasy, and then romantasy within that. So not a lot of variety. Dystopian is pretty popular, particularly if it's in a fantasy setting. Romantasy obviously is the big one right now in YA.
Yeah, and that's interesting to hear that too, Alex. I feel like while I think YA often offers representation before you see it in adult fiction, like more
Absolutely.
queer titles, you just see a lot more happening in YA before adult gets there. But genre is huge in adult right now. I feel like lots and lots of genres are booming, and this is where genre blends are really getting big. So romantasy, as you mentioned, I'm going to get into that because we cannot talk about genre blends for YA or adult without talking about romantasy right now. But horror has been huge, and there's just so much diverse representation and kinds of horror happening right now. And so all these things are really entering the mainstream. Romance has also been really big. And thank you for doing the tech, because I know tech is a thing. I just read a book called Dangerous Fictions by Lyda Gold. And before I dive into some of the adult stuff, which I know I have to be fast because we both want to make sure we cover the bases, right? This is about, in reflection to Don Quixote, right? So she says, 400 years later, heroic adventures are everywhere. The war is over, the nerds have won. Statistics vary, but about 5 of the top 10 best-selling books of all time are fantasy novels, while 8 of the top 10 biggest box office hits can reasonably be classed as science fiction. So writers of literary fiction increasingly cross over into genre, often with squeaky disclaimers and press interviews about how their writing isn't actually genre fiction, at least not the bad kind, those supposedly silly and escapist junk adventure stories. So even escapism has lost its conceptual dunce cap. A number of essays in the last few years have touted the psychic value of escapist fiction because no one wants to live in this world, despite the fact that we all still have to. So this change in perception of science fiction and fantasy is so recent that I, an ancient hag in my 30s, she says, still remembers when it was distinctly not okay to publicly enjoy this kind of fiction. This is a delightful and very robust look into the ways in which we look at fiction over time. And its power and what we think it should and shouldn't do. So really worth a read. But so I wanted to start that before I dive into the next bit, which is sneaky genre blends. Okay. So now we're at the point where you're seeing basically like genre really become a part of mainstream. So there are people that maybe say that they don't like speculative fiction or they don't like, genre, they're not open to these things. Then you can tell them, but wait a minute, did you read Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis? So that's a book that was huge. It's a historical fiction novel about a female scientist who pursues her work with stubborn tenacity. But there are some chapters that are narrated by her dog, while she's grieving the loss of her partner. Another example of this is Kate Quinn, who's mainly known for historical fiction. Her recent book, The Briar Club, is set in 1950s DC. It's about women in a boarding house there and how one woman who arrives sort of changes everything for them. I will say that there's a scene in there in which a librarian gets fired for being a suspected communist. It felt very real. So the house narrates some of the chapters. I didn't expect that. I don't feel like any reviews are really mentioning that this is like a genre blend, but speculative elements are creeping into all kinds of works. The Overstory by Richard Powers won the Pulitzer Prize. It's about nature and trees, and there are chapters about tree communication in there, but it doesn't necessarily get discussed as spec fic. So these are great places to really start branching people, thinking about appeal, helping them find something that is maybe, to them left field, because some of these things that are, again, are mainstream novels are genre blends and in a sneaky way, which is really lovely to see. So you can help them make more adventurous jumps in their reading by some of these books that have become really, really big. So I have to dive into romantasy next. So romantasy is huge. It's getting people back into reading in ways that are just really, galvanizing, really exciting. Even People magazine got on board and said that dragons and folklore and smoldering glances, or witches and fairies and blush-inducing scenes, if you've been curious about romantasy but don't know where to start, we've got you covered. That's where this big image is. And so I wanted to just start by mentioning Kushiel's Dark by Jacqueline Carey. This is a good example of like an older title that this has been around for a long time. There is a difference between, romance, fantasy, and romantasy. Romantasy can be darker. There may or may not be a happily ever after in book one. If it's a series, it might be a longer arc to get there. But some of it is just people are really enjoying the adventure, the action, and the spice, like it's about reclaiming pleasure, that whole term about smut. This is empowerment in a lot of ways. And so you're seeing a lot of, embrace of it. But the thing we need to note, and what Alex mentioned too, there's not a lot of representation of romantasy. It is predominantly white and het and cis. And so finding those works that are more representative, where, while not all readers really saw themselves in the fantasy genre until some of these books came forward, there's still not enough representation. So I wanted to mention a few things. Song of Blood and Stone by L. Penelope is the first in the Earthsinger Chronicles. Jasmina is an outcast in Elsira due to her dark skin and Earthsong powers. And when soldiers reclaim some of her village and come into her home, she ends up catching feelings for Jack, who's an injured spy. So war is brewing, but Jasmina Minda may be finding her power and her heart. So this author also writes as Leslie Penelope, and her historical fantasy, The Monsters We Defy, is really worth checking out. Then we've got The Sun and the Void by Gabriela Romero La Cruz, which starts with Reina, who arrives at Aguila Manor, and her heart's been ripped out, actually. It's missing. So her estranged grandmother, who's a sorceress, gives it back to her. But soon her heart belongs to the upper caste daughter of this house, Celeste. This is a South American-inspired debut fantasy. It's the first in the series. And then we've got The Jasad Heir by Sarah Hashem. Sylvia is a fugitive and the last surviving member of a royal family after a massacre. She must hide her heritage and her magic to survive. Things get complicated when she catches feelings for Aaron, a man who would hate her if he knew who she was. So romantasy is not hard to find. There's a lot out there, but finding representation is the real key. I'm going to move on to the next big genre blend for adults, which is horror thriller. Okay, this is really taking off. One of the things that we were asked to talk about is how to find these things, right? I think that one of the challenges when it comes to horror thriller mashups is authors that are traditionally seen as horror authors, they don't always get tagged as thrillers. So the other ways to find them in, say, novelist is to look for things like fast-paced, plot-driven, gruesome, unputdownable. And so those are some of the keys and some of the appeals that you're going to be clicking when you're doing searching in addition to horror, just to find those things that are kind of combining forces, right? Can't talk about horror thriller right now without talking about Gabino Iglesias. The House of Bone and Rain is three friends who are in hot pursuit of a drug kingpin after one of their mothers is murdered. This is a story of revenge with some dark and paranormal twists. So the next book I just read, and I just cannot stop thinking about it. It's a Seattle author's debut, Listen to Your Sister by Nina Viel, and it's about three Black siblings in Seattle who have to flee the city after some things go really, really weird. They head into the woods. Great idea, not a great idea. And some nightmares start kind of coming to life, but it's a book about family bonds and trauma. And it's just there's so much going on in that book that it's just a really marvelous debut. And then we also can't talk about horror thrillers without Stephen Graham Jones. So all of his work really combines, again, really high octane, high stakes, indigenous representation. So The Only Good Indians, My Heart is a Chainsaw, I Was a Teenage Slasher. The ways in which he's really building this alchemy of horror and thriller is really popular and marvelous right now. And last, I'll mention Fever House by Portland author Keith Rawson, who's been getting some shout outs from the man himself, Stephen King. Sadie Hartman, aka Mother Horror, said, when gritty, suspenseful crime thrillers collide with supernatural, apocalyptic horror novels, Fever House is the result. An explosion of graphic violence, colorful characters, and buck wild storytelling. Love that. Anyway. Oh, right. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? I don't know. I just know we're going to have a lot of questions, and I want to make sure that we can get into all the things. So one of the next things is cozy everything, okay? So all genres, all cozy, for the longest time, we only thought of cozy in conjunction with mystery. Now it is all over, and stressful times call for comfort reads. So, they might deal with some dark themes here and there or personal challenges, but in the end, you're going to be wrapped up in like a feeling of goodness, of coziness. Kimberly Lemming's books come up here, which is like she's writing these really fun, tongue-in-cheek fantasy romance books with memorable titles like That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon, or I Got Abducted by Aliens and Now I'm Stuck in a Rom-Com. You get the drill. It features lots of representation of characters of color as well as queer rep, and it keeps the tone light and cozy, but they are very steamy too. And then we've got Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst, which is about a librarian who's actually fleeing where she lives because there's a civil war, and they have to grab with her sentient plant assistant the spell books that they're only supposed to guard. They start life over on a small island, and it becomes a story of community and mutual aid. And then we've got The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, which is about a reclusive witch who takes a job as a tutor for three young witches and finds herself in community that she did not think she needed. And one I didn't get on the slide because it's not out till August, that's coming out, that's going to be delightful. Annalee Newitz's first novella, Automatic Noodle, which is about these robots that are running a noodle shop. It's going to be just fantastic. And finally, just to wrap up the adult book blitz here, science fiction mystery has been huge as well. And you can find a lot of these by looking for science fiction and suspenseful, and they are often tagged to as science fiction mysteries. Novelist really helps us in this regard. They're trying to keep track of trends and helping you find those things that people are asking for. A couple things to note here: Station Eternity by Mur Lafferty, who also wrote some previous science fiction mystery books like Six Wakes. This is the first in the Mid-Solar Murders series, and it introduces Mallory Veridian, whose penchant for solving crimes made her unpopular on Earth. She ends up going to the space station. She still gets in trouble, kind of can't stop herself. It's sort of one of those, wherever you are, wherever you, what am I going to say? Wherever you go, there you are, right? Like you can't, you are who you are, just gets into trouble solving mysteries. And then there's been some really lovely science fiction sort of Holmes, Watson pastiches, like The Tea Master and the Detective by Elliot de Bedard, which is a Vietnamese-influenced world where the main character, Long Chow, is a woman investigating a murder, and she enlists help from a sentient ship who becomes her partner in crime, right? And then we've also got The Space Between Worlds by Mackay Johnson. This is a multiverse where you can only traverse into other timelines if you are dead in those other timelines. And Kara is a Black queer woman who has died in most of her lives across the multiverse, and she is on the top of the traversers who has to hop between worlds. And it's an action-packed science fiction mystery that also asks deep questions about identity and more. So I'm going to stop there and let Alex take you into the realm of YA genre blends. Thank you.
Thank you, Misha. Before I move on, I do want to remind you, if you have a question, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. And we do have one question that I want to touch on real quick, which is magical realism a genre blend? And I'm going to say no. It is... I don't know if it counts as a genre. I think it gets misused as a genre blend a lot. It has very particular origins in Latinx Hispanic fiction. And I think it tends to get misapplied to anything where magic feels like it's part of the world instead of a very particular kind of response to literature. So I would personally say no. Others might disagree, but I don't even know if I would really count it as a subgenre. I think it's a technique more than anything. But anyways, so go ahead and keep adding your questions. I'm going to bump into Q&A as we go along, or excuse me, bump into YA. Okay, so YA historical fantasy and historical horror are both, well, horror in general in YA is increasingly popular right now. We're sort of in a golden age of YA horror. And in fact, my hot take is that if you want actual, interesting, diverse horror, there's a lot going on in adult, of course. But I would say if you want a lot of queerness and a lot of diversity in various ways, YA horror and small press horror is where you're going to find most of that before it makes its way into adult. Historical fantasy is not as popular right now in YA, but there is a lot of, or there is a good solid chunk in there doing different things, again, particularly with diverse characters, diverse identities. That Self-Same Metal is one of my favorites. It's of recent years. It's set during Shakespeare's time, and so a lot of like Elizabethan historical figures pop up. There's fairy magic. It's really, really interesting. The Wicked Bargain, of course, features non-binary and queer characters set in like the golden age of piracy in the Caribbean. There's a lot of magic involved in there. Shadow War is a bunch of like queer and BIPOC teens taking on World War II and the Nazis, which is always fun, punching some Nazis. The City Beautiful, of course, is set in Chicago during the World's Fair. What is that, 1898? And again, it involves Jewish immigrants, queerness. It's a kind of, these are all stories that we don't really get to see a lot in historical fiction or in fantasy, and so combining them together is really interesting. Secret of the Moon Conch is set in the Aztec Empire. In the historical horror, again, this is a smaller subset, but it is like holding on right there. We Are the Beasts is set in, I think, 17th century France. We've got Now Conjurers, which was set in more recent times, 80s or 90s, we've got Don't Swim Here, which is both present day and historical. So kind of jumping back and touches on, I don't know if you've heard of how public swimming pools, the collapse of public swimming pools is often linked to attempts to desegregate swimming pools where, you know, Black people would try to swim in a public swimming pool and white people would pour bleach and things like that in there. So there's some really interesting things happening in the YA when you start mixing historical time periods. There is one YA science fiction historical novel that I could find in recent years, and that is My Dear Henry by Kaylin Bayron. Jekyll and Hyde, science fiction, it's queer, it's BIPOC, it is wonderful, and it's pretty much it. This is what I'm talking about when I said there's a lot of there's a lot of genre range in some areas of YA and not a lot in others. Science fiction, for the last several years, publishers have insisted that science fiction doesn't sell in YA, and therefore they do not buy it and they don't publish it. And my counter argument would be that science fiction doesn't sell because they don't buy and market enough of it in order to get any momentum to it. Also because fantasy is very popular and a lot of publishers are trying to attract adult readers into YA rather than attracting teen readers to YA, and adult readers right now want to read fantasy. And so that's why YA is skewing more towards fantasy. But we do have some science fiction blends. So again, My Dear Henry is historical and an adaptation. Light at the Bottom of the World is really interesting. It's dystopian science fiction set underwater with a Muslim main character. It's completely unique. Into the Sunken City, also dystopian, set in the future underwater, but it's sort of a retelling of Treasure Island. So there's a lot of pirate adventure stuff going on at the same time. A Spark of White Fire, based on I'm blanking on the story, an epic poem from Indian folklore, but set in space again with sentient spaceships. There's gods, there's science fiction. It's a really interesting trilogy. Aetherbound, one of my favorite science fiction novels. It's sort of space opera, but it's also really quiet. It's a little bit cozy at the same time. There's polyamorous relationship. It deals with child abuse. It's so good. Rise of the Red Hand, again, dystopian. There's a lot of dystopian stuff going on. I wonder why. But this is sort of cyborg mechanical stuff. Set in Southeast Asia. There's environmental disasters. Super interesting. And then also pointing to Wab Kinew and Darcy Little Badger. So Indigenous futurism is a very, very small subcategory right now in YA. We're seeing more of it in adults, but these two authors are basically doing it in YA. And it's so interesting. It's science fiction, but from an Indigenous perspective. So it kind of blends sort of science fiction tropes, but runs them through the cultural lens of whatever the Indigenous writer is writing on. I don't even know how to describe it. It's so interesting and it's so unique. Cozies and dark academia, of course, always a good staple. F.T. Lukens is my go-to for cozies. If you ever want YA fantasy cozies, they are the author to go read. The Kindred, so again, talking about very narrow range of genres. The Kindred is a YA science fiction. It is the only space set YA science fiction novel written by and about Black characters. That's it. Alicia Dow is the only one who's getting published right now. And also, all of her books feature ace-spec characters, so characters who are on the asexual spectrum. Both of the characters in The Kindred are ace-spec, which is really, really cool for me because I'm also ace-spec. Why on Earth just came out. I am describing it as an alien invasion cozy, which is great. YA anthology, super enjoyable, really recommend. Brewed with Love is another YA cozy fantasy. Sort of it would fall under the romantasy category for sure. Dark academia. So with dark academia and romantasy, those are kind of fluid terms. So I'm gonna do some exploration real quick. When people say dark academia or romantasy, I think a lot of readers think that those are rigid genre definitions or specific marketing labels that you have to have X, Y, and Z to qualify as romantasy, or X, Y, and Z to qualify as dark academia or cozy or whatever. And I don't think it's that rigid. When you think of romance, like capital R romance, there have to be certain tropes for it to count as a romance. If there's no happily ever after or happily for now, it's not a romance. It's just a love story. Dark academia and romantasy are not that. They were born out of reader descriptions that publishers sort of colonized onto and then went back to readers. So it's very weird. So if you try to Google like dark academia, you're gonna get, can you all see my screen? Actually, before I move on, can you see my screen? Okay, good. When you Google dark academia, YA dark academia, you're gonna get this collision course of people who don't know what YA is and people who are randomly speculating about what dark academia is. And it just turns into chaos. YA is actually a very specific thing. It is not just anything with a teen character. So if you Google YA dark academia, you're going to get The Portrait of Dorian Gray and Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, neither of which are YA and neither of which are dark academia. It just turns into just mass chaos when you try to Google it. Another example for romantasy, oops, clicky. Or excuse me, this is dark academia as well. Again, Reddit is another great place that people often go to. And looking for YA dark academia, very specific recommendations here. And none of these are YA. A Deadly Education, despite the Hugos continuously nominating Naomi Novik's books in the YA category, it is not actually YA. It is adult. So is Ninth House. So is Magic for Liars. The Percy Jackson series is not dark academia. And it's also middle grade fiction. So it just gets chaotic. I would say if you are when you are looking for these titles, be careful about what you're finding. The Raven Cycle is actually YA. I would probably count that as dark academia, maybe. But just be careful about what you're finding. Just because it's on the internet as with that description, it may not be what your readers want. Like if you have a reader who says, I'm looking for YA dark academia, and you hand them Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, that teenager is going to put that book down. So you cannot just take those lists. You have to be really double check those books, maybe read some reviews about those books, look it up in Novelist, something, but do not just take a mass list that you find on Goodreads or something, because it's going to be bananas. I will also add that I have seen both The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss and the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson, both listed as romantasy. So be careful. Okay, dark academia. Thinking of Drake Livingston is a really interesting YA horror novel, A Lesson in Vengeance. Again, another queer gothic sort of fantasy. I don't want to spoil it. A Lovely Dark and Deep is just coming out, deals with immigration issues. Vampires are pretty popular right now in YA. Immortal Dark blends dark academia with vampires in a new trilogy. Flawless Girls by Anna Marie McLemore. Anna Marie is the only writer, I believe, who's in YA right now, speculative fiction, who's writing intersex characters. They are also intersex. So some really interesting representation there as well. Now, romantasy, again, taking all of that chaos that I just said. I'm thinking about romantasy kind of the way that Misha described it. So there definitely has to be sort of the romance elements to it, but the fantasy has to be equally as important. And you need to kind of have that happily for now, happily ever after kind of element to it. So these are some of the ones that I would recommend. Sabaa Tahir, of course, titan of YA. Sabaa Tahir should be in all of your YA collections. This Fatal Kiss is a new one out. It is queer in some really interesting ways. House of Marion, very high adventure, exciting. Last of the Talent, and this is the Sophie Kim series or trilogy. Again, high adventure, blending some really interesting Asian mythologies. Axio's The Floating World series hasn't come out yet. It's on its way, but it's looking like it's going to be really interesting, sort of high fantasy with that romanticy element, blending and sort of a retelling of the Celestial Maidens series. To a Darker Shore features an autistic main character and is written by an autistic author. So that's really exciting. It's one of the, there's only a few, I think, in the YA fantasy romantasy realm with neurodivergent characters. So that's really exciting as well. Sorry, moving along. Assorted speculative. This is just sort of speculative mashups and all kinds of things. Lots of different blends happening, fantasy, historical, speculative, science fiction, all kinds of good stuff. And needing help with your YA speculative genres, on my blog, all that information is on our contact section. I keep a running list of all of the YA speculative fiction releases each year. And I do note like genres and things and subcategories and stuff like that. So if you're trying to find something about vampires or whatever, that's a good place to go. All right, I am gonna open it up to Q&A. Misha, if you want to jump back on here, we got some Q&A stuff.
That was
see.
great, Alex. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if you have more questions, feel free to drop them into if you want us to go back to anything. I know we kind of breezed through. We have a lot of books on there, so feel free to ask anything. Okay, so the first question we have in here, what would you say are your favorite resources for keeping up on emerging genres or genre blends?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I just triangulate. It can take some time, but you know, I look at Reactor Mag. I look at I read all. I look at The Guardian. They do a lot of really excellent book coverage and old and new stuff. I follow a lot of authors online. I follow a lot of readers, looking at you know, basically some of the things you're seeing in terms of like book talk trends. But often the readers will let you know too. Like sometimes they'll walk up and let you know, hey, I really want this. You know, for one example too, like horror has been so big and I'm getting so many more questions. I have a colleague who's on here today who helped create a horror section, and people couldn't be more happy about it. But I feel like often it's the readers that are leading me to some of those resources. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, I'm sort of a little bit different because I'm also a book critic. And so I have access to more materials than I think a lot of people. I'm on publicist email list, so I get a lot of PR emails. But I think for me, the biggest one is social media. I know people say like, I don't want to be on Blue Sky or whatever, like don't be on Twitter. But that is where I get like 90% of the recommendations and things like that is on social media, whether it's Instagram, Book Talk, or Blue Sky. Even if you're not posting and you're just lurking and following authors and readers and bloggers, that's where I get most of it. I mean, I don't really use the trade mags very much, which I probably shouldn't say. I mean, I read the reviews, but I find it's easier for me and my patrons. I'm in a high school library, so my kids are great about just coming up to me and asking me for stuff. And if I start hearing requests for certain things, then I start buying more books in that area. And I just keep track of my circ stats as well. What are the genres that are circulating the most, or where shelves are getting moved around a lot, and then I'll start buying more in that.
Yeah, you know, and you know, Becky Spratford is here. The RA for All blog is
Oh, yes.
invaluable. She does a lot of roundups of, you know, awards and different conversations around what's happening in the field. Also the novelist sort of like year in review that Becky just did with Yaika Sabat was really incredible. But when it comes to lurking online, you're going to find people that you start to trust. Like you like how they do the book coverage. They are thinking with a reader's advisory standpoint. And then much to the point that Alex made, some folks out there are going to steer you wrong. They're going to describe those books in a way that aren't correct. That kind of thing will happen. So you do have to kind of be discerning and look where you're looking, and just be open yourself up to looking in different places for some of these things.
Okay, the next one, how to keep up with trends and what's popular. I think we covered that. But do you request arcs? So again, I'm a book critic, so it's a combination of a lot of publicists email me asking for coverage, which I can't always do. Or like I said, I also get a lot of stuff on social media where I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And then I'll pitch it to one of the several sites that I write for. and they'll get ARCs, or I'll get an ARC from an author. So it's a little different for me, but I know librarians can get ARCs. Misha, how do you get those?
Yeah, great question. So we, sometimes do get things mailed to us from publishers. That's always invaluable, but it's always sort of like hit and miss. We don't always know when they're going to come. I know that a lot of people will access things online. So Edelweiss, Libro, you can, request access for some of those online ARCs to read things before they come out. I know that Library Reads folks who participate in that, that's how they're getting a lot of their advanced copies. But I'm still a print reader, so I love when those physical ARCs come. Like again, the Anne Lee Newitts I just got. And as someone in the chat said, yeah, they're not usually associated with cozy. I think that they were wanting to give us what we really want right now, which is something that's a little more feel good. And yeah, it sounds like a really exciting book. Excited to read it. But yeah, I just like everyone else sometimes have to wait. But you can reach out and request, and publishers do, understand that we are out there to help market these things. And so they do what they can.
I will say with YA in particular, and this was a trend that started during lockdown, it can be difficult to get print galleys of YA, especially if the author is marginalized, and within that, especially if it's an author of color. It can be very they may not even do it. A lot of time, I would say probably 50% of the books that I request, they're like, nope, we don't have galleys. We'll send you a final copy anywhere from a day before the release to 3 weeks after. And so it's just kind of a gamble on that. And there's a lot of racist reasons for that. So we got a bunch of questions in the Q&A about what YA is. And then there's also some in here about defining horror. So I'll let Misha, you take that one. But to define YA, happens a lot. The Hugo Lodestar Award is the bane of my existence. YA is a marketing category. It is a very specific marketing category. It is books that are marketed to, and with an age range generally of like 12 or 14 to 18. It is marketed to teenagers. It is written for teenagers. Teenagers must be the protagonists of the book. Again, it must be targeted to teenagers. It is very easy to find out if a book is YA. You could look at the publisher. Most YA is published under a YA publisher or imprint. A lot of them will even say, like, Little Brown, books for young readers. That is a YA book. Look at the age range. Amazon is terrible. Evil Corp is terrible, but it's a great place to go find the age ranges. It has it right there at the very top of the screen. Age range, 14 to 18 or whatever. The age range of the character must be a teenager. The author will usually write under one pen name as the YA. Read the blurbs of the back of the book. If there are other YA books, the cover copy will often say this young adult fantasy. It's not hard to find YA. Stephen King's It is not YA. For one, the characters are 12 or adults in the book. For two, it was not written for teenagers. It was written for adults. The further back you go, the blurrier those lines get. But generally speaking, YA needs to be written for and by about teens. That also gets challenging because YA is being aged up to attract adult audiences. The majority of YA readers right now are adults. That is a publisher's intention to colonize and cannibalize the genre. That's a bigger topic. Horror.
Oh yeah, okay. So horror. I feel sheepish even trying to do this with Becky in the room. But horror is a genre that leans into your fears. What are the things you're afraid of? And it could be things in the real world, real world monsters, human monsters, or it could be the paranormal. So there's a real spectrum in terms of what horror can do, but it really is a feeling-based genre where, again, you're able to explore some of the fears you might have in the context of the story. And again, it really can look a lot of different ways. Horror can be across a variety of genres. There's historical horror, fantasy horror. And now we've got horror romance. I mean, there's been one of the mashups I didn't get into is there's been horror romance. one I just read last week is, as someone mentioned it in the chat that they did too, Dating and Dismemberment by J.L. Brody, which is a monster enemies to lovers. A Nazi bar gets taken down. It's a super fun, sweet horror romance. But yeah, it's leaning into those fears, exploring those feelings in a variety of contexts.
And more specifically, because we got 2 questions on this, there was a question about, is cozy horror a thing? And also, how would you define the difference between thriller and horror?
Okay, yeah. So there have been discourses around people who don't actually believe that cozy horror exists, but I think that increasingly it does. What it comes down to is whether or not you can take a little violence in your horror. Cozy. T. Kingfisher is a good example of this. You mentioned them in your talk too. They often blend horror and humor and romance all in one package. And so that might not be for everyone, but there is a cozy vibe to that overall sort of work that T. Kingfisher often does that combines them all. What is the difference between thriller? Thriller tends to have more of an action-based plot. It's more adrenaline-based. You can have a kind of a sleepy horror novel where weird things happen, but it's not exactly high stakes all the time. But a thriller really ups the ante and makes that sort of plot-based action-based element more prevalent.
Thank you. There was a quick question about what speculative means. It's sort of an overarching umbrella term. It's also a specific marketing term as well. So speculative covers science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So all of sort of anything where it's not quite realistic or realistic but jacked up to 11 in terms of spaceships and all that kind of stuff. Speculative also can be its own genre label in that it's harder to define. I actually might put Star Wars as speculative. Is it fantasy? Is it science fiction? Is it revolution? What is happening here? Where you can't, it's a little too blurry to kind of pick out. So that's what speculative means. A little bit of everything. Let's see here. Where was that? Oh, there were some questions about recommendations. One about recommending for young men. I'm guessing teen boys in that one. And also, basically there were a bunch of questions about recommending between kids that are aging up into adult fiction from YA or younger fiction, and then specifically for teen boys. I'll start with the YA piece and then you can transition for the transition part. But for YA, for teen boys, I don't actually make any distinction between how I recommend for them and teen girls and teens of other genders. I know that some people may have difference of opinions on that in terms of school libraries and YA collections. I don't believe that fiction should be limited in that way, or at least I see it as a limitation. If I have a teen boy who claims to not read, I can usually tease out what it is we need to get for that kid. So for me, I don't it doesn't matter to me who the target audience is. I still recommend for any teens, regardless of gender. I've given books with boy main characters to girls. I've given girls books with non-binary characters. I don't personally make that distinction. The Alex Awards are great for crossovers. Books with college-age characters are great for crossovers. Romantasy is actually a really good crossover genre. Adult romantasy is a great crossover. I've got a lot of teens who are reading adult romantasy, and transitioning into, or not transitioning into, but reading and kind of cross that way. So romantasy is actually really helpful for that. Misha, what have you experienced in the publics?
Yeah, I mean, same. I also try to think more expansively about what people want. And so you're just trying to listen to what they're asking for and finding something appeal-based. But you asked about that bridge between YA and adult. And I think it really comes down to, actually, to some degree, the brilliant sort of, thing about cozy coming into the fore is that often those stories are going to maybe have a little less intensity and still be of interest to those readers. So you can, give them something in a variety, in the adult realm, because we also work with a lot of those like 11 and 12-year-olds who are extensively, reading and have, exhausted what they think is NYA. Although, I mean, what it comes down to is that there's just so many great things in children's NYA that sometimes don't get marketed well or don't get into their hands. So also just as an adult focused readers advisory librarian, it's still important to be on top of YA and children's work, while also looking for things in adult that would speak to them too. There was someone who asked a couple different things. Our favorite genre blends.
Yes. I don't know that I have one. I mean, if it's queer and it's BIPOC and it's YA and it's speculative, there's a pretty good chance I'm gonna read it. Yeah, I don't know that I have one. I mean, maybe right now it's space opera. I really like space opera. YA space opera is super interesting to me, and there's like nothing there, but particularly if it has a little bit of a cozy or romance element to it.
Yeah. I feel like it changes all the time. I don't know about you, but I feel like, I end up loving what I read last, or, so a book I'm reading right now is a genre blend. It's Monstrilio, and it's by Gerardo Simano Cordova. It is kind of a horror, literary horror, and it has a realistic sort of feel to it. And it's about a woman who, it starts with the death of a child. She cuts the lung out of her child and starts feeding it, and it becomes another entity, right? So it's a weird one. I feel like it would also appeal to people who don't necessarily see themselves as horror readers, because there's something very naturalistic. It's also a very queer book. It's about the exploration of relationship with both of those parents after that loss, and what happens when this creature enters their lives in ways that they didn't anticipate. It's got a lot going on.
I've actually read two. I don't read a lot of horror. I'm a giant baby horror, but I have recently read two Indigenous horrors. Erica T. Wirth's new book, The Haunting of Room 901, which I can't remember when it's coming out. I'm reviewing it for Reactor, but it's really good. It's a great sort of crime thriller. There's fantasy elements in there. And the horror is not too horror-y. So I really appreciated that sort of blend. And then of course Stephen Graham Jones's new one, The Buffalo Hunter, which is vampires and Indigenous horror and historical horror, and it's really intense. I'm audiobooking that one, and it's taken me a while to get through because it's so scary.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. I think it comes out next week.
Mhm. There was a question about urban genre blends for urban fiction. We don't have urban fiction really in YA, and I don't read enough adult literary fiction to know what's going on. So, Misha, do you know what's going on with that?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, so urban fiction was so huge for a while, and I feel like it's been on a little bit of the down. It's been waning a little bit. I haven't seen a lot of exploration of sort of genre blends in that genre, which isn't to say that there's not huge potential for that. But I don't know. I mean, sometimes what we want isn't there yet because the publishers haven't I don't know. There's issues with comps, because if they're only publishing something that looks like something else, then other things don't happen. So I think we need to do more to also celebrate those things that don't fit into any one place, and ask for things that do break the mold, don't just sort of try to ride the trends, right? So if anyone knows of an urban fiction sort of genre blend, please share it. I would be eager to know about it.
There's a bunch of questions in here asking for definitions of genres, genre blends, which I don't know that we have time for. That might be something that you have to Google, or you can reach out to either of us on social media, and we can try to answer them for you, because it gets really funky. But I did want to touch on the question about transitioning from middle grade to YA. Because again, this touches on what I talked about earlier about how publishing is aging up YA to push out teen readers in lieu of getting more money out of adults. Right now, good luck. So I don't know what to tell you. The world sucks. There are, as of January through April for this year, there are no YA books with 14 and speculative fiction with a 14-year-old main character. There are 3 with a 15-year-old character. All the rest are generally 17 to 19. Younger YA is not really a thing at the moment because the publishers, again, say that it doesn't sell, and doesn't sell because they don't sell enough of it to get any momentum, but also because the publishers are trying to age up YA to attract adult readers, and adult readers do not want to read about 14-year-olds having comedy adventures, doing whatever, or having very light romances. 25-year-old more fantasy readers are not wanting to read that. So that's kind of the world that we're in right now. It sucks and it's terrible. I know that there's authors writing upper middle grade and lower YA, and most of them cannot sell the books. It's just good luck. I don't know. Let's see, Misha, were there any other questions in here that you wanted to tackle?
Well, there's a question for you about genrefying a high school library.
Oh,
you want to look at
yes,
that?
I did see that. That is a hot debate right now in school libraries. I do know many librarians who've done it and who swear by it. I also know some school librarians who've done it and hated it and are in the process of de-genrefying their fiction. I have not done it. It is not something that my students have particularly asked for when I brought it up. It's not something that they have found particularly interesting. My students are my community anyways, is less interested in the genre itself and more interested in being hand-sold a book. So like shelf talkers are working great, face outs work great, hand selling, great. I pull book lists and recommendations for students. I do book bundles. That stuff goes like gangbusters. A lot of times what they tell me that they want is not what they actually want. So I have not done it. I am sort of in the process of breaking Dewey and sort of genrefying my nonfiction and doing some really chaotic things that I'm sure Melville would be rolling in his grave around. But all of my fiction is together. I don't separate out new adult or YA or adult. It's just all together. And my students, anyways, are reading across, and my adults are reading across ages and genres. So it is not something that I am right now choosing to do with my community, but I think it's a community-based thing. If your patrons are asking for it or would find it easier to find those titles with labels or stickers or genre find, do it. Do whatever works for your community.
Yeah, and to your point, Alex, like figuring out ways to basically do either displays or shelf talkers if you don't have genre sections, because library collections, even if they're small, can be overwhelming. What are the things you can do to really highlight the things that they might enjoy or bring things together that they might not have seen or thought of? But that's a way to kind of like, again, create that experience, whether or not you've genrefied your collection or not.
Absolutely. And there is no genre of new adults. It existed for a hot minute a couple of years ago, and then the publishers decided we weren't going to do this anymore. It was hard to market. Nobody understood it. The readers didn't understand what it was. And so basically what's new adults is upper YA at this point. They've just aged the characters down so they're teenagers, and it's become new adult. Oh, did we go over? Sorry about that. We're over. Okay, I think that's it. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I was not looking at the chat. Feel free to reach us on social if you need anything, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Alex.
Thank you both. Sorry to kick you off. We could have let you talk forever, but we have more workshops to get through. So thank you so much, Misha and Alex. And we're now going to take a little break before our next workshop, Nonfiction Readers Advisory, which will begin in just a few minutes. While you wait, please enjoy these resources and recommendations from our sponsor, Penguin Random House Library Marketing.